where the sacred meets the secular, offering safe, grounded, practical, and responsible guidance for guides. This is the Psychedelic IQ Podcast. One of the most interesting things that I have learned over the last almost 20 years of doing my own healing work is how so many of the mystic traditions, when you peel back the humanity and some of the dogma and the doctrine, how so many of them say the same thing. And that goes for whether you're in 12-step recovery or whether you're studying in South America or somewhere in the East. There are so many similarities between all of these mystic traditions. And when we can get into the mystical portion of them, rather than the religious portion, when we can really dive into the mysticism, there is enormous healing capable and so much explanation offered for what's really happening within the psychedelic experience. And I think our guest today does an amazing job of weaving a lot of these different traditions together. I also think that being able to practice and study within an unbroken lineage can bring enormous insight into how we both hold the medicine and how we can help our clients heal. David Luce was born in the Bay Area just in time for the 1960s, and like many people, he experienced a great deal of suffering in his early life, which culminated in being orphaned as a teenager. In his search for a response to all of his pain, he discovered Buddhism, Taoism, and plant medicine at the age of 15 and spent the better part of his life since then intertwining paths as deeply as possible. After a short encounter with an Ivy League university, David spent 16 years living in Zen and Tibetan Buddhist Dharma centers, including 4 years as a Zen monk in Asia. As part of David's medicine path, he also spent 3 years in the Amazon training with traditional healers and has completed an extensive apprenticeship in the Western approach to medicine work. His experience spans from Hakomi somatic psychotherapy, acupressure, massage, and hypnotherapy, and he is a teacher in the Hollow Bamboo School of Meditation. In 2005, David founded Two River Sangha, which is dedicated to the meaning of the Buddhist path with earth wisdom traditions. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to David Luce. David, thanks for joining today on the Psychedelic IQ Podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well, GV, and very nice to be here with you.
Wonderful. Well, it is my pleasure to dive into who you are and what you do and what we can learn from you today. I'm really excited about today's conversation. There's so many really interesting conversations and topics that we have talked about during the pre-show, and I'm really excited to hear some of your interesting approaches. So
great.
Before we get started, just maybe tell me, actually, before we really get started, tell me what your intention is for our time today.
Well, my intention is to have a good time. You're a very interesting guy, and I think it'll be a really interesting conversation. And but first and foremost, my overall intention is to somehow benefit people, maybe people who are practitioners of healing arts or who are interested in that hopefully it'll be useful for them.
Beautiful. What kind of life do you live today? What are your favorite projects you're working on right now?
Well, I love to meditate. So I do meditation every morning. I live near the woods out here in California and love to be out in nature. And whenever there's a good movie playing, I'm kind of a cinephile since I was a kid. Just that sort of thing, mostly.
Beautiful. So now let's maybe switch over to a more consciousness focus and perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what kind of stuff you're working on today in the realms of consciousness, whether through meditation or in your own psychedelic work, and how you got to this point.
How I got here is a long story.
Okay. We got time.
My adult life has really been an intertwining of uh, medicine work, psychedelics, in other words, of many different kinds, and spiritual inquiry practice with meditation, qigong, tai chi, yogic kind of things, and then I guess what you would call transpersonal psychology, but basically the Western wisdom tradition of the mind, the consciousness. How does it get formed? And when it's harmed or hurt, how do we heal it? And I'm really interested in all those, how those things all come together. And one thing I've been really on most of my life also, but especially lately, is somatic psychology and maybe what you could call somatic psychedelics. Like, how does it actually manifest in the body, in the subtle body, which is referred to in the yogic traditions a lot, and in the mind. So I'm really interested in the kind of interplay of those things. And then also, what is it from the psychedelic side? What is it? Are there tools in a meditative or yogic tradition that could actually help people who are journeyers or help people who are practitioners have deeper, clearer, and more transformative experiences? And of course, it goes, all those three things can really benefit each other, but that particular connection between the psychedelics and meditation is interesting for me.
Well, you have already given me about 5 different topics I've highlighted in my notes that we can go all different directions from. Before we do that, let's do share a little bit just with our listeners about your history and what got you here. How did you get started in both maybe the psychedelic world as well as the more Eastern philosophies, yoga, meditation world?
Right. Well, I used to say, people would ask me, like, I was a Buddhist monk for a while, which is a kind of an extreme lifestyle choice. And people would ask me, like, how did you get into that? And I would just say, suffering. It's like things are tough, then we look for some kind of solutions. And that was definitely the case in terms of the Buddhist teachings and the Taoist teachings. I had a very difficult time when I was younger and started to look for answers. But then at the same time, there was just this natural curiosity about, like, what's going on behind the scenes. And I think that's what led me into plant medicines, was the stories I heard about people being in altered states and or expanded states, and just wondering what was behind the curtain, so to speak. The Wizard of Oz scene where they find him behind the curtain. So what was behind the curtain of what's going on, kind of?
What did you find?
Well, when I was 15, a friend of mine who I'm still friends with, he was a school friend, his older brother, all of us young, like 15, 16-year-old friends in a little group, we all really wanted to get high. We wanted to explore that realm. And the one we were interested in was cannabis. And in those days, I don't know why, I don't know if this is still true or not, but you could smoke marijuana and not get high. It was almost like you had to learn how to get high, how to access the state. That the potency was way, way lower. That might have had something to do with it. And so one day, the older brother and the older brother's friend took a few of us up into the woods behind these hills covered with redwood trees near where we lived. And we started puffing on cannabis in one location, and nothing happened. And we were all very excited. Then we went up on the top of a hill where we had a really big view. And we tried again, and then still nothing happened. And then I had read a book by Andrew Weil called The Natural Mind. And in that book, he talked about how little kids would spin around to alter their consciousness. And I remembered that. So I said, oh, I'll try spinning around. And I started spinning around, and everything just dissolved into light. Me, the universe, everything. And I totally lost my cool, started screaming, and I was freaked out. And then one of the older boys came over and, grabbed me and said, it's okay. This is it. You're just high. And then I was in this transported place of what felt like a lot of insight for what was happening in me emotionally, and also a sense of something about how consciousness was interacting with the world to create what I was seeing and feeling and hearing. Just an intimation of that. And then we were off to the races. Read some books about the 60s, electric Kool-Aid acid test and Aldous Huxley. And so I was just very inspired and excited to explore that psychedelic realm. And luckily, I wasn't all that great a meditator. I was kind of a egghead little thinking kind of kid. So I did a lot of reading about Buddhism. But then with the medicine work, I very naturally gravitated to not using it all that often, like once a week, not around school or, family interactions, and do a kind of a journey with it. So that, I don't know where that came from, but that was the orientation.
There's something really interesting that you said about that, and you had never shared this spinning around story with me.
Right.
But I think that it's fascinating because my teachers from Peru serve both wachuma and ayahuasca, and use a lot of tobacco. And the wachuma specifically, they talk about the medicine causing you to get dizzy. And sometimes they will say nauseous, but a lot of times it's dizziness that they're referring to.
Right.
And it is in that period of dizziness where our consciousness, our mental model starts to separate a little bit, starts to get a little looser. And that's when the visions come in.
Yes.
And they will even use, if individuals are struggling with being able to get into that state, they will use tobacco, and you can actually take a full inhale of tobacco off the maestro's pipe, and that inhale will oftentimes cause some nauseousness and some dizziness,
right.
But that will oftentimes be just the strength and the power that you need to truly blast off. So I've never heard of anybody spinning around to cause that same effect. I love the idea, though.
Yeah, it worked that time. And later on, when I became a devotee of the Grateful Dead, and they were kind of my first spiritual teachers, there were people we would call spinners at the shows who would do, it was very reminiscent of the Sufi dancing, the spinning around. So I never went up and asked the spinners at the Dead show what it was like for them, but I can imagine.
Yeah, the Sufis have been whirling dervishes for millennia.
And the cool thing is that when they're spinning, obviously everything's moving, but I've been told that they really keep their very center line. It's actually, they're looking and orienting around complete stillness. So I like that, even if only as a metaphor of that complete stillness and open space, kind of.
Yeah.
By the way, my ayahuasca maestros would, at least the ones who spoke Spanish, would they would call the state maracion. I hope I'm
Mm-hmm.
pronouncing that right, which means seasickness.
Mm-hmm.
So the maracion would come on, and then you'd be in the space. So
So the seasickness is also built into the words wachuma. So, at
ah,
least from my teachers, I am not Karo and I don't speak Quechua, but wa in the word wachuma is the sound of a baby crying.
mm-hmm.
Chuma is seasickness. So when the baby cries because of seasickness, then grandfather holds you. The medicine will hold you and rock you and allow that to go away. So the seasicknesses are also part of that terminology as well.
Yeah, fascinating. And that reminds me is just a few days ago, I've worked with Wachuma a lot over the years, but I was doing a little bit of word questing also, like looking for like, okay, what does Wachuma actually mean? And I don't recall, but it was definitely something exactly like what your teachers told you,
Yeah.
that there's a kind of a referencing dizziness or a discombobulation of some sort.
Yeah.
I like to describe the overall process of doing journey work as the dis and recombobulation process.
I like that you use recombobulation just as a word as a part of your practice. I think it's fantastic.
Well, because you want to stick the landing, you want to bring back the good stuff. So,
Yeah. When you were a Buddhist monk, was that in the States or was that overseas? Where have you studied?
okay, yeah, my first. So when I was learning, starting at that young age, the only Buddhism that was really popularly accessible for a reader was Zen Buddhism. And I really liked the way that they were really looked at um, the natural world and the spiritual world and our lives as all meeting, as all being one thing. And then I ended up studying with a Korean Zen master, and then who had tried LSD, I found out later, just to see what all the fuss was about. And then in the 80s, I went overseas to South Korea and became a monk there. I spent 4 years there on that trip.
Wow. So 4 years ordained Buddhist monk.
Yeah.
Then you come out of that experience and you find yourself in Peru as well.
Peru came a little bit later. First, I found another Tibetan Rinpoche, and I started studying with him. He also had tried psychedelics, like just once or twice. They wanted to see what was up. And it was only actually after I had met the man who started doing, I was a client of his and started doing LSD psychotherapy with him. And then he introduced me to ayahuasca as part of that process. And then I ended up in Peru after that, still
And what
doing
was
all
your
this stuff kind of blended in.
and what was your experience down in Peru?
Well, in Peru, I met different shamans. I went to Ecuador and Peru and Brazil, although ended up spending most of the time training in Peru. And oh, it was fantastic. Ayahuasca was just so visionary and powerful and such a palpable presence. In our society, we tend to think of anything besides the subjective as kind of inert, and we don't really allow for the possibility that there could be a consciousness to something that you drink and put into your body. It's assumed that the bottom line really needs to be biochemistry, but here was a drink that when I drank it, it was alive and there was somebody there. And in fact, more than one person, a whole multiplicity of different spirits sometimes. And there was this very intense and ancient and beautiful, powerful healing tradition that went along with that. These people were, they call them maestros, and so they were really masters. But also, another word for maestro in Spanish refers to a teacher. So they were also like teachers, and I liked how they would not say necessarily like, I'm doing this. They would be like channeling or facilitating a process, and then working with, the spirit doctors, the spirit of the plants, perhaps my spirit or other beings. And I found that at that time I had a lot of trauma in my life as a kid. So I had a lot of leftover symptoms from that. One of them was very deep depression, what I think you would call clinical depression, although I wasn't really getting a lot of therapy in those younger years. And I found that ayahuasca was incredibly good, not just in general, but specifically for depression. And I met one of the first ayahuasqueros I met was an old man in Ecuador, living on the edge of the jungle, having grown up, in a pure tribal uh, uh, society, and then now, intermixing with Western society. I did one ceremony with him, and afterwards, the next morning, I asked him through his son, so what happened? What did you do? And he said, "Oh, well, your consciousness wasn't really in your body, so I put it back in your body, and that seemed to work quite well." Okay.
I have some experience with this. I can relate.
And
I
so,
resemble that remark.
so the cool thing about these ayahuasqueros was that on the one hand, they were really traversing very high spiritual realms or very deep and dark heart healing, emotional healing. And at the same time, they were very kind of, matter of fact about it. It's like, there was this, and then I changed it some, and that was better for you.
Yeah. It's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that.
The other thing I'll mention is that, I had been in the Buddhist world, and in the particular schools I was in, am still in, they talk about the bodhisattva ideal, which we could think of as somebody who's just, in a very general definition of that, is just somebody who's of benefit for other people in service. And it was just amazing to meet somebody who had no connection with that tradition, but who was really a bodhisattva.
My teachers frequently remind me that we are always working for our clients, but we're always serving God. And
Beautifully said.
And when a facilitator, curandero, whatever word you want to use, ayahuasquero, huachumero, comes from that place, it really takes all of the responsibility away from the individual, and it reminds us that I am not the doer of the action, nor am I responsible for the outcome. If I am simply doing my best to help relieve the suffering of others,
right,
in as conscious way as I possibly can, then I can get out of the way and I don't have to take responsibility for any of that. And then it does become very, to your point, very matter of fact, like these really amazing things that are happening in ceremony come through the individual. The curandero might be the channel, but they always give the responsibility and the credit to the doctors, to Padre Dios, to whatever tradition they're sort of reporting to.
I'd say the good ones do.
Very true. Very true.
Some people, like in any profession, some people get very full of themselves because they have a lot of skill and talent, and that feels nice. But I totally agree with you that the real maestros, you could say, or the real healers, of any sort that I've met, they really understand that. As one of my Western doctors said, or had a little sign on in his office, he said, "God heals, but I take the fee."
True enough. Well, what you have shared with me, if I'm looking at this geometrically, I see a Venn diagram. I see this medicine work in a circle. I see Eastern philosophy in a circle. And then you also mentioned psychology, somatic psychotherapy, sort of transpersonal psychotherapy, this more Western approach to healing. And it's something you mentioned in the beginning, that's something about a healing philosophy. And I'm curious if all three of those things overlap.
Yeah.
In the center of that, I'm guessing, is some kind of healing philosophy. Can you share with me and the listeners what you might categorize as your healing philosophy?
Wow, GV, that is a big question. um, I would say, if I had to, I've never thought of that before, but I would say in this moment, I would say that it's about using the whole to treat the whole. So that, and those three realms could be, like Buddhism could be, you could substitute Sufism or Christianity for Buddhism, or you could substitute, good talks with family or wise uncles for psychotherapy, perhaps. And the medicine piece obviously could be many different medicines or traditions. But what the working with the overlap does is it's really working with our spirit and our connection with nature and our connection with other people and with ourselves. So I guess it would be, you could call it multi-spectrumish, because these are different spectrums or realms, and they're all in us. So being open to working with each of those gets it so that you don't leave anything out. Also, this is something that I've come up with just as a Western person, or maybe a better way to refer to those people as moderns, people living a modern lifestyle and anywhere in the world. And so, for modern people, one of the most powerful things actually with medicine work is the fundamental reconnection with nature, with the earth, with the sea, with the sky, with the animals and the plants, leaving aside any of the other wonderful things that happen in medicine work. That's really, really important to address. And then the psychological piece is like, how do I relate to myself? And a lot of times, I think modern life, again, is we're disconnected from social relations, from families. They're far away, or they're disturbed or broken connections with them. So, how do we actually bring that into the work? And then I don't know what to say particularly for the spiritual work, but that also is just so fundamental. But then with all of these, I think the really important thing is to not be really dogmatic about it, and be practical in working with those realms. Like, does it have to fit into some specific theology or philosophical outlook, what one person is doing on a journey or in a retreat? Or could we just approach it from general principles and see what particular manifestation appears for that person or really resonates with them?
It's beautiful.
That the non-conceptuality piece is really helpful. That's one of the most powerful things about the medicine work for us is like, you end up in a non-conceptual space. And then because there's more space between the concepts, so to speak, we can change those things. And
Hmm.
like the shaman who, put my mind back into my body, it's like, let's change that concept.
Let's tug on that thread just a little bit more. And I'm curious for you to explain how your meditation practice has influenced your psychedelic work. And if you want to share that both from maybe the participant side, those ingesting the medicine, or from what you've learned from a facilitator perspective, how does meditation or how can meditation impact this work?
I feel like meditation practice is a way to approach the same space that medicine work approaches and lives in a kind of a more step-by-step process, so that you can do it, you can become familiarized with it, and become more accustomed to it, and become more open to the possibility of things happening that aren't what you expect to happen. And it's basically, and I think this is underappreciated in our society. Meditation is founded upon altered states. And they like to have kind of a controlled altered state, and they'll call it a samadhi or an absorption, but they want you to get into an open, expanded state that's not controlled by your thinking or particularly controlled by your emotional imperatives, whatever those might be. So, if you start to become accustomed to that before you do a medicine journey, then basically the meditation experience is helping you create a container so that even if because the thing about the medicine is like there's usually a surprise, like surprise, this is a deep fear, or this is a heartbreak, or this is more bliss than you think is possible, or all kinds of things. So that is very well handled with medicine work. But then how do you create a container so that that can be really easily and well and deeply received? And I felt like when I started doing the medicine work, which I started doing really as a client in my 30s, I had been meditating for about 10 years. I wasn't like an expert meditator, but I was diligent and I was pretty good at it. Then the facilitator told me that I could hold the space unusually well. And by holding it meant like I would just be able to accept it and have the experience of being afraid, but not be afraid of the fear, so to speak. So I think it has a lot of benefit for that. But you could also, I found I could use that meditation in the journey itself. When I was in a really intense journey, I could, sorry, 1 second. I could kind of come up for air in the middle of a journey. There was kind of a natural kind of times in a journey, when you come up and it's almost like you're coming up for air if you were a dolphin or something. And in those moments, I would do a little micro meditation. I breathe in, feel my body sensations, and emotional state, and then breathe out and kind of welcome the next wave for what was going to come. So anyway, from the my experience as a journeyer, it was very, very helpful, and afterwards also. But then later, after I'd been to Peru a bunch and stayed down there a bunch and started guiding people, I found that actually it was a great way also for me as a facilitator to be able to be that container as well, for being both kind of connected with the medicine space, call it medicine/meditation space, and be a guide that could be open, supportive, and clear, and connect with the client's experience, but without getting my own stuff quite so involved. That meditation had helped me to learn to do that.
So if you were, well, I'm going to ask a different question first. We think of meditation as a practice. Like, nobody's very good at meditating when you first start. So many thoughts, very little concentration and focus. And over the course of hours, sometimes hundreds of hours of being trying again, bringing our thoughts back to that single point of focus, we eventually call it a meditation practice.
Right.
Would you also say that psychedelic work is a practice and that we can get better at it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Years ago, I met, and then I later read some writings by Myron Stolaroff. He was in the very early days in the 50s with LSD. Then he became a friend of Sasha Shulgin and was part of a group of people working with still legal substances. His phrase was a trained user. He was an engineer, so it wasn't the most poetic phrase, but and I realized that he really was onto something in that description of like people of that. If this was your path, if this you're on like a medicine path, then you could become trained into how to use your medicine so that you could navigate with it, that you could flow with it, so that you could prepare for it, receive, and then bring whatever gems that you received in your journeys back into your life, and then come back again. And of course, that's really explicit for many people in like the ayahuasca shamanic tradition and the guides, the maestros definitely used to teach me and the other apprentices about learning how to navigate, which way's up, which way's down, what are we doing here, and how do you do your thing. And I really have always encouraged friends and fellow travelers, as well as people I worked with down in South America, to like really take that on. I think it's quite useful. And so a facilitator could be a healer on one hand, but they could also be a teacher and a coach on the other hand, for like, okay, this is, maybe somebody comes once, or then they come twice or three times. And then as they start to navigate then and enter into a deeper relationship with that world and the beings of it, then it just can become more beautiful, efficient, and powerful. And so I think a guide really should be a coach for teaching people, even if they don't use substances outside of, say, a guided environment, still, and this is kind of by virtue, perhaps, of meditation or just being in nature, which is kind of like a shamanic meditation. It's like, okay, when you go home, then, bring some of this into that realm too. So
if all of that's true, then it would, I think, imply that if you are facilitating or guiding psychedelic sessions, I think that you would probably agree that you should be you should have significant experience. You should have a practice with the medicine that you are serving. Is that accurate?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me more. What are your thoughts?
Well, we're in a world these days where we have lots of people with lots of suffering. We have these medicines. The two most well-known ones are MDMA and psilocybin. And then, just to mention veterans, for example, we've got tens of thousands of veterans who could really use this specific help, as well as many, many other people. So we have a lot of therapists who are, doing therapy with people and know how to do that well. And then maybe they need a battlefield promotion. And it's like, okay, how soon can we get people to where they could actually start helping others with that? But I got, trained as an ayahuasca apprentice, and I also did a lot of my own personal journeys with the guide that I mentioned before I even got connected with ayahuasca. And I think that was very much to my advantage, because then I'd say two reasons maybe to start with. One is the guide or the prospective guide, the facilitator, can get into touch with and clear as much of their own material as possible, so that they become a cleaner vessel or a cleaner connector to the realm of medicine work and healing. And even if they've already done a lot of like regular talk therapy, the medicine work will, or meditation for that matter, the medicine work will typically take people down many levels into deeper realms, or more muck, you could say. So on that hand, becoming more kind of familiar and purified, but then also becoming stronger, because they have to work with things that are difficult and powerful. So then they're, in the shamanic tradition, as I think you know very well, they do these dietas in the ayahuasca tradition. And part of the reason to do those is to strengthen their energy, to strengthen their soul, you could say. And so whatever medicine tradition you're in, that's going to happen for the facilitator. And then in their own work, they're going to have personal experience with the more that they do, the more, since I'm arguing on the more medicine side, the more medicine experiences they have, then the more likely they are to encounter weird things or offbeat things or difficult things or unusual bliss states or all kinds of different possibilities. And then if they're working with somebody, they'll be able to say like, oh yeah, to themselves, maybe like, oh yeah, I know what this is about. And then of course, intuitively speaking, the client will feel all of that, even if the facilitator doesn't mention it to them. And that will just kind of add to the capacity for the client to feel held and feel, trusting with that person.
What do you think happens when facilitators are offering these substances without the experience of going into those spaces on their own?
Well, I don't think any training program that I know of is encouraging anybody to do any guiding unless they've had at least 4 or 5 experiences, right? And then I think the actual optimal number of experiences is before working with people would be much higher than that. But if somebody's, one thing is they're not, I think the role, okay, this is, I guess I'm defining the role of a facilitator being filled by somebody who is experienced.
Mm.
So for me, if they were doing that without the experience, then they would be more in the realm of a friend. Like, friends can, help each other, guide each other, and be there for each other during a medicine journey. But what could happen would be somebody could get very, very harmed because they might contact a state that's very, very painful, very exposed, early trauma, or other things. And then that facilitator wouldn't have the knowledge or confidence to really help them and support them in that. So that could go quite wrong, actually. Um, yeah, and it just goes outwards from there. And it's very reminiscent, honestly, of when Freud was training people to be Freudian therapists and Jung, they were required to go through their own analysis, and then they weren't considered ready until they had completed that. So I think there's a big analogy there. A workaround might be that you could fold in some kind of observed, a starting out guide could be the assistant for an experienced guide and sit in on some sessions. That would be a way to transition into it. But because of the nature of it, the nature of the medicine experience, they really have to have experience. And this was something that was very clear to people in the Western tradition starting out to guide people back in the 50s and 60s. It very immediately became clear.
So I hear and I agree with all of that. And I would also, to my knowledge, I think that the most recent version of the MAP/Lycos training for MDMA doesn't require the trainees to sit with their own medicine. I think I also see that happen a lot with ketamine, that you see a lot of doctors, you see a lot of anesthetists. Is that the right word? Anesthesiologists.
Right.
You see a lot of them serving a substance without having experience. Go ahead.
Supposedly this is one of the reasons why Lycos's application was refused. Was that the board members that were evaluating it didn't really understand the intersubjectivity piece of the medicine. They were really treating it like some version of blood pressure medication.
Yeah.
And I think the anesthesiologists who do that are making the same mistake.
It also strikes me through looking through this lens that when we look at the facilitation in the underground world compared to above ground, I would say the vast majority of people interested in serving or that are serving in the underground world today are doing their work with medicine. They're ingesting their own medicine or trying other types of work. They're doing their own work. And that's probably not nearly as true when we look at the above ground world. When we look at a traditional therapy path or we look at a doctor's path, there's a lot less internal use of those substances when we look at above ground.
I'd say the above ground community is kind of indigenous inspired. And because of the underground nature of it, it's unsanctified by, the powers that be. And you can't do a legal training program with an underground style. So I think they've ended up perhaps more aligned with the indigenous teachers and traditions, which is more of an apprenticeship model. And, if you want to be an ayahuasquero, they're gonna say, okay, great, drink up.
Yeah.
And keep drinking, and then we'll see. So there's a certain sort of thing like that going on, I think.
And at least in my experience with the indigenous teachers that I've worked with, the permission to serve does not come from taking 100 hours of a class. It does not come when you are given a certificate of completion. It doesn't even come from the human maestro. The permission might come through the maestro, but the permission itself has come from the medicine, has come from the spirit of the plant.
Right.
Once that message has been delivered through the maestro, but the plant has given someone permission to say, you can carry this medicine now.
Right.
And it's not even a human decision. And I think that the Western world, the global North, maybe the modern world really looks at education as a certification process, as being equipped to do this thing because you have taken these X number of hours or this course. And that's not really the way these medicines have been carried for centuries prior to our renewal.
That's very true. It's like the Western, or I don't know what phrase we're using these days, but I'll say Western. The Western culture in some ways is trying to chew into the medicine worlds, but then the medicine world's trying to chew back, kind of. And the training programs like the MAPS training program, or the one at UC Berkeley, or the one in Colorado at Naropa Institute, or others, they're in a kind of a bind because they're on the Western side. They have to, they're serving that community, that population. And so they're not allowed, it would violate the kind of their agreements to facilitate trainees to do sessions with something that's not a legal substance. And so it's kind of like this strange place that we're stuck in as a healing community right now.
And I can say we had the program facilitator, coordinator from Berkeley on the show. And as they were wrapping up a cohort of training from UC Berkeley, that cohort did go to Oregon, and they were required to sit with medicine to, I believe, to meet the requirements of the program. So I think that where possible, organizations are doing that. I also know some training programs are requiring individuals to fly to Jamaica and to sit with mushrooms and to have legal experiences when it's available. But I don't think, at last count, I read somewhere that there were 150-ish training programs that would teach you how to be a guide. And I'm guessing the vast majority of them do not require that level of experience. And it's mostly the sheet of paper that you're getting. I want to circle all the way back. We kind of landed in that vein in an interesting way, but I want to go back to meditation. And if you were speaking to a facilitator, how would you encourage them to either help themselves or help their clients in the preparation, in the experience itself, in the integration work? How would you actually incorporate meditation or the training of meditation, implementation of that into the experience?
Well, kind of analogous to the training of guides with medicine, I would encourage the facilitator to meditate, right? If they're going to work with it, and then teach their clients a little bit, or start to accumulate resources for the clients as well, combination. And the main thing I would say is keep it as simple as possible. And I am such a big fan of somatic medicine, somatic meditation, somatic psychology, because, there's that famous book, The Body Keeps the Score, about trauma. And so our psychological material is accessible through somatic experience. And it turns out that the most accessible forms of meditation are also somatic. They're also with the body. So, one thing I would tell or encourage the people who are facilitators who want to connect with meditation is to do simple body based meditations and connecting with the breath. So, the body, the breath, and a consciousness or awareness. So, first thing I could go on, but
Yeah, I mean, are there resources if you could direct someone to a teacher or a course or an app? Like, would
right,
you tell someone to just download any one of the number of apps out there? A lot of people say, "Oh, I really like guided meditations," and
right.
I think that they're interesting. I don't think they are as effective at maybe what you're referring to. But correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong, I think. And I'm a meditation teacher. I have like a horrific number of hours accumulated in meditation and retreat, and um, but I haven't found the ones that I'm very satisfied with. So I actually have decided I'm going to create some, and they're going to be on a website called Soma Sangha. And they're going to be specifically simple somatically based meditations for, well, just meditation in general, but also specifically for people who do medicine work or support medicine work. Um, in the meantime, there's a Tibetan Buddhist, American teacher of Tibetan Buddhism called Reggie Ray, Ray, who I really like. He has a whole series of somatic oriented guided meditations that you can get as an audiobook that I think are quite good. There's a teacher named Will Johnson, who's one of my teachers, who teaches something he calls breathing through the whole body. And he's got some books and some audios that people could access. I think his work he's also a medicine friendly teacher, an openly medicine friendly meditation teacher, which is quite hard to find. But the basic thing is sense your body. Where you sense tension or holding, let go. Start to breathe. Breathe in your body. You can choose different places to breathe. Try to breathe in your chest. Try to breathe in your back. And basically start to perceive the tension and let go and let down. And then I would think a really good place for people to end up would be breathing in their belly, below their belly button. Long, slow breathing in your belly. It's so simple. It sounds like it's too simple, but it's actually brilliant.
I have found with many clients that they don't really know how to take a deep breath.
Exactly. Right.
So much of our breathing is in the upper chest. We have a
Right.
really hard time breathing into our diaphragm. And that, to your point, is like breathing into the diaphragm is one of the easiest ways to reduce stress and calm the body. And
Right.
when you're in a challenging medicine experience, the
Exactly.
breath is the one thing that will bring me back to a ground, that will help me to stay focused and centered. And if we don't know how to breathe, it's
Right.
really hard to tell someone in the middle of a challenging experience, just breathe deeply.
Right. So so ideally a facilitator could introduce people to the concept of relax, like especially relax your belly. In the Tai Chi classics, they say "sung the waist," meaning "sung" meaning relax at the very start of their practice. So let yourself be fat. That's what I tell them sometimes.
I love that. That's beautiful.
And then the belly, and then the heart. So, beforehand, get them into the idea or the experience of feeling their body sensations. A lot of people don't really do that very much. So, feel interoception, it's called. So, just feel the sensations in the body, feel the breath, let go and release tension, let your belly breathe, or feel your heart. Breathe into your heart and let go. And the cool thing is, in my own experience as a journeyer, like I mentioned, it started to feel like I was some kind of a dolphin or a porpoise, because I would be deep down in the guided journey and then I would come up, and then it was like a shallower level of experience. And those were the times when my guide would check in with me, and then he'd encourage me in this sort of thing also, because he's a long term meditator also. So he's really into that body awareness. And then that's a kind of a wonderful way that right in the middle of the journey, the, the journey, or the person who's having the journey, can help to take us back to Myron Stolaroff. That can be part of their training, to be a trained user, and to, like, okay, yeah, every so often I should just connect with my sensations and the breath in my body.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. And I
Yeah,
think it's often underappreciated. It's often underappreciated in the West, global North, modern society.
right.
It is, and I wouldn't even say that, at least my teachers in Peru don't focus a lot on that kind of breathwork or teaching, but I would say that every teacher that I've ever worked with that comes from an Eastern tradition, whether it's Taoism, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Vedanta or Hinduism, there's a lot of focus. Anybody that's talking about meditation is typically incorporating some level of breath awareness. So I find that there's much more awareness that comes from the East than maybe the South or the West.
Yeah, and also it's interesting amongst Buddhist aficionados. There is a question about, sometimes it's the body piece is not so emphasized by some Asian teachers as much as it could be. And what my kind of peer group, what we came up with was that their way of life was already so much more connected with nature and the physical world that they didn't really they felt like, oh yeah, everybody already understands this. And yet, sorry. And then if you look at like ayahuasqueros or pachumeros, or people from the maestros from the older brother or sisters, the original tradition, their forms of what we could call meditation might look more like just being out in nature, or being in the woods, or going hunting and gathering, or swimming in a river. And those, they wouldn't have a name for it because it would be so embedded in their lives. But um, it's something that I feel that we as Western people who are interested in and participating in medicine traditions of healing and awakening could use some support with.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
sounds like we both agree about that.
So I want to shift one click over, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I've had a recent experience with this. I reached out to the Self-Realization Fellowship, which was
Oh yeah.
Yogananda's school, and I had been interested in participating in the teachings of Kriya Yoga. And I was honest in my application form, and I mentioned that I also use psychedelics as a part of my practice. And I then was reached out to by one of their individuals, and we had a conversation with one of the swamis, I think is what they would refer to themselves. And he said, well, sorry, but if you can't use psychedelics and Kriya Yoga, this meditation technique, at the same time. They work on two different parts of the brain, and if you choose to stop using psychedelics, then you would be more than welcome to use these
Right.
techniques. So tell me a little bit about your teachers that are a little more friendly, and maybe what your perspective is on how these things can work together, or maybe how they're contraindicated. Like, where do you come from?
Well, I definitely come from the integration approach. I think they can actually help each other quite a bit. Both meditators whose main practice is meditation, maybe trying some medicine work, and vice versa. Um, and If you go back into prehistory, you'll find spiritual traditions that are very integrated with medicine, such as the early Hindus and Soma, and the ancient Greeks and the Eleusinian mysteries, and the civilization of Chavin, for example, very integrated with Huachuma. Um, and in talking with my Zen master and Rinpoche and other meditation teachers, the most common thing I've found is very much a pragmatism to it. They look on anything, but including psychedelics, as a potential aid to spiritual practice, including, like being in total darkness, fasting, or going off on the top of a mountain, or being celibate, or having a tantric sex, or just anything is fair game. They're very pragmatic about it. And what they've told me is they're one of, at least my Zen master's attitude was, this would be great. He thought it would be great for Zen students to have one or two experiences with psychedelics to really open up their mind, have a truly an experience before or beyond thinking. And then he thought that they would be best served by continuing with their meditation practice, not because psychedelics were wrong or bad, but because probably he thought people would get attached to the experience and just start kind of rotating around it, which is a possibility.
Absolutely.
And then my Rinpoche, his first, Tibetans are very into visualization practice. They visualize themselves as a deity or a bodhisattva, Buddha. And his first comment was, good for visualization.
One of
And,
my favorite quotes from Rinpoche, I'm pretty sure it's from him, says, "The bad news is you're falling. The
right.
good news is there's no ground."
Yeah. Trungpa Rinpoche.
Yeah.
And Trungpa had, I've read descriptions of his experiences with psychedelics as well. I think that the real key in my experience of being somebody who's really going across those barriers, and I'm fundamentally not fixated on one or the other system. I'm interested in healing and awakening, those two things, and service to people subsequently. Um, it really depends on how well medicine work is done, how clearly it's done, and how well it is integrated into somebody's life or into somebody's meditation practice. I don't think that you can say, because of this interrelational quality that medicines have, setting, sitter, substance, those are all so much a part of it. You can't just say that, like, okay, just the substance creates a conflict with spiritual work. The latest advice I got from a very, very, very good meditation teacher was that in my medicine work or practice, I might well come to a place where the energy associated with the medicine is kind of creating a certain kind of felt friction or just distraction, and that would probably be a signal that it was time to just transition out of that medicine work. But that it's not a different direction in my book. It's just a different means.
You just said your focus is on healing and awakening. And
Yep.
I'm curious, are those two things the same or different?
Oh, such a good question, Grandpa. That's like a Zen koan, right? No.
I don't think that I'm capable of Zen koans, but I appreciate the compliment.
Yeah, of it. Yeah, I think that it's just a question of nomenclature. It's just a question of what we call it. The Buddha used to use these extended metaphors of, the himself as a doctor and the teachings as medicine, and that they would heal you of, your delusions. And then, medicine. I've met very, very awake, enlightened medicine people. One of the great ayahuasca shamans I studied with, we were hanging out with one of his apprentices and me and one other person, and just kidding around. We were going to drink ayahuasca that night out in the jungle, and somebody said to him, they said, "Why do you want to drink? No, you're all done. Why do you want to drink?" And he said with a lot of energy, this is an old guy, skinny old guy, he says, "I want to see." Like he just wanted to explore. And I'm sure that was a form of awakening. So in the end, when we awakened, then we heal ourselves. We are healed in the spirit.
I
We
couldn't
know,
agree more.
and at the same time, for example, here's an example. Somebody has done a lot of meditation, but has a lot of unresolved psychological work and material. Well, they need to do some healing on their pains, on maybe their childhood or patterns they picked up. So there's a healing element right there too. And a lot of the like I said, the from my point of view, the meditation path also encourages these expanded states. And they have their own methods in the expanded states for doing some of that healing work too. So it's very, very mixed together, I think.
My experience, I had tracked over 1,500 hours of, and for listeners, I'm going to use air quotes. I've tracked about 1,500 hours of meditation. It was the vast majority of that was sitting on a cushion thinking. Just in total transparency. But before I went in 2020, I sat for 10 days of Vipassana. And it took 3 full days for the concentration and the focus to really develop. And it was a very profound and a tremendously healing experience for me. Day 3, day 5, day 8 for me were just absolutely transformative. Day 9 and 10 and whatever the extra half day was, I was in such excruciating discomfort. I was so ready to be done.
Right.
But what I can say is meditation prior to that was really difficult. I'm so glad that I went because I was able to have a meditative experience solely through meditation at Vipassana. It required a lot of energy and effort. Now what's happened, I came back from Vipassana and my meditation practice sort of fell off. I was not getting nearly as much out of it. But today, my medicine work and the places where I have gone in medicine and the healing that I've done and the trauma that I've released through medicine has made my system, what my interpretation of this is, my system feels safer. I have more
Right.
relaxation, more concentration in my system because of my medicine work. And
Right.
it actually helped me in my meditation work.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes for me, meditation is like sandpaper, and mushrooms and ayahuasca are varying sizes of hammers. I can accomplish more demolition of my ego with ayahuasca, wachuma, mushrooms,
Right.
LSD. But when I get right down to it, sometimes some sandpaper is a nice respite and a break,
Right.
and allows me to go a little slower.
I thought of something I'd like to toss in.
Yeah.
With meditation, I would really encourage people to think of meditation as part of a yoga practice, and not necessarily the yoga from India, but just as in terms of like breath and movement practices, right? Which could be qigong or tai chi or even holotropic breath work, be kind of put in that category. And one of the things that happens with medicine work from a yogic point of view is if somebody takes some psychedelic medicine, their what you call the subtle body is opened up. That's part of how it works. So then you get flows of energy through the channels, through the chakras, through the kind of energy spin in a way. And the thing about the medicine work is that it can open up that subtle body much wider than anything else quite quickly. And so let's call it meditation slash yogic practice helps to open up those channels in a more gradual way, in a more kind of entrained way. And that will actually help the that will help the person who's in the medicine journey be able to better tolerate that increased energy flow. And I would bet that was, even if I know the going to 10-day retreat program, and it's not a specifically yogic thing, but I bet it opened up your channels a lot, and that subsequently your channels are more open.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
You mentioned the subtle body a couple of times, and when you mentioned it in the very beginning, I thought of a question and I kind of forgot about it. But subtle body is incredibly important as it's in the yoga tradition and the Advaita Vedanta traditions. We talk about the subtle body, maybe the causal body actually being the holder of the soul, of the Atman, that gets transferred when we move from one body to another body.
Right.
What do you think? What advice would you give to facilitators who are working with people who do not have any ontological framework? They don't have a spiritual
Right.
philosophy. Maybe they're even atheist.
Right.
And then they have these really big experiences that shatter their current conception of atheism. They realize that there's something out there that they never thought was out there, and they come back having this vastly different experience of life. What would you say to those people? How do we take people without a belief system? And no shame on any of that. I am not proposing that there's anything wrong with any belief system, but sometimes a lack of belief system or spiritual philosophy can cause some pretty significant distress when
Right.
that is shattered. What would you say to some of that?
Um, like to who am I speaking to?
Yeah, speak to anybody. Speak to a facilitator who wants to maybe guide a client
Okay. Yeah.
through that experience, or if you want to speak directly to the perceived
Yeah.
atheist.
To the facilitator, maybe I would encourage them to. There are different approaches, but I'll toss out a few maybe. One is you could talk if the person's having an actual like subtle body experience and that is kind of freaking them out. Don't use the word subtle body. Say energy body, because we all understand energy. And you could even say they could even say like it's like radio waves. You can't see them, but you can feel them, right? Another way that they could reference it is like call it the emotional body, because the subtle body actually is very connected to emotions. And so, like, we feel emotions in our body, but it's not quite the same as feeling our leg or our knee joint. And they flow a little bit. They flow through us. They come and then they go. So that's the way that you can like bring in the subtle body by calling it something different. Um, but it's also actually classically connected with breath. So it's an experience of the breath, and the breath has they could say that like there's the physical breath, and then there's the subtle breath. And interestingly enough, psyche in Greek doesn't just mean mind or soul; it also means breath.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I learned this from watching a, a documentary about a psychedelic Buddhist retreat that happened in Switzerland, and the expert on psychedelics mentioned that in Greek, in the ancient Greek, psyche means breath as well as soul. So, like, psychedelic is not just mind manifesting; it's breath manifesting.
Wow, interesting.
But
And that's
then,
very helpful.
but the rational way to get people who are like say rational atheists is say just treat this as a phenomenon. Just start gathering phenomenological experiences. Don't try to explain them. It's just happening. Be open to it. I'm not, and then the facilitator could avoid making some kind of labeling on it. Just like, okay, so you're having this experience. How does it feel? Or what does it look like? Or um, don't try to put it into a box. Let it be that person's unique, perhaps mind blowing experience, because they had the call them on it if they this is where the integration piece comes in. Like if the person is saying in the journey like, oh, I can feel you, or like I can sense the tree, that they're seeing through a window, or if they're lying underneath the tree, and the tree, I can feel the tree. Then later on, when their rational mind comes back online, make them read that back to them or tell that back to them. And then you said, oh, I can feel the tree. Do you remember saying that? Don't put it in any box. Just keep it phenomenological.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
That's very helpful. So we're getting closer towards the end here, and I have a couple of other just more philosophical questions.
Mm-hmm.
One is what your interpretation, or maybe because you've spent time in the jungle and you've also had personal experiences with other substances. Do you think that these, specifically the plants, come with their own spirits? And then go one step further. And would you say that there are also spirits in LSD and MDMA and ketamine?
To quote Richard Nixon back in the 60s, that's a very good question. In other words, that's a big question. I'll give you my take. I would say plants do not come with spirits, but spirits come with plants. I think there is a spirit that comes through plants in my experience, that comes very strongly for me through different teacher plants or master plants, but that people who are wiser than I tell me come through all plants. But I think that in my experience, it's as if each physical plant is a part of a larger whole, that the spirit, of what we could call the spirit, so that most of the time it's not necessarily localized to one particular tree or plant, but it's more generalized. And I think in reflection, we could also look at human beings. There's a famous Catholic theologian who said, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. So in a way, like our body is a framework for spirit moves through, including our own personal beingness or spirit. I'd say that's a good parallel with the plants.
My teachers have always said, I mentioned earlier, that we work for our clients, but we're always serving God.
Yeah.
And they would also say that Dr. Ayahuasca, Dr. Wachuma, Dr. Tobacco are also, they're plants, but they're also serving the same God. So they're operating at a different plane than, and a different vibration than we are, a less physical form. But the spirit of those master plants are still working for the same universal energy, whether you call it God, universe, spirit, Pachamama. I don't want to personify something that I don't believe can be personified, but all working in the same intention.
Yeah. And I personally have had the experience of, in my youth, as I think I mentioned, having this powerful experience with cannabis. And it was part of a 3-year, incredibly powerful relationship with that spirit and that plant. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, it was as if my experience was as if the spirit of that plant came back to me. I didn't think of it. It came to me and it said, hey, we've got a little bit more work to do. How about it? So I really experienced that. Now, in the case of LSD, which my teacher worked with, and so I had a lot of experiences as a client with him, I've never felt that the LSD had its own particular spirit. But to me, it felt as though it was the spirit of the Tao. It was more like the Tao in Taoism, of like that which moves in all of us. And Stan Groff, actually, the LSD maestro of maestros, uh, he came up with a description that psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers, which he was really talking about LSD specifically. And then I heard an interview with him a few years ago, a podcast, and he amended that. He said, actually, they're beneficial, specific, non-specific amplifiers. So there's a beneficence to that. And I've also heard tell of native healers using ketamine, because it is legal, for healing their own communities in the Southwest. And they are not slowed down at all by questioning whether or not ketamine has a spirit to itself or not. They're quite happily using it as a spiritual medicine.
Beautiful.
In that wide context.
So you have a tremendous amount of experience across many different cultural, geographical areas. Is there any medicine sort of that's overlooked in your perspective, in your experience, that's overlooked that you're sort of excited about or wish that there was more research being done on from a healing perspective?
I think I have two answers. One is Huachuma, which I've had a fair amount of experience with and participated both in Peru and other places. Huachuma has the capacity to be a natural, long-lasting, and very, very deep, and also pharmaceutically safer version of MDMA. I think there's a lot of potential there. And as a meditator, I also think Huachuma is very, very meditatable, I could say. So, and I'm very interested just personally in like, not just using one and doing meditation or going back and forth, but what about trying to actually, blend the actual practice of medicine and meditation? I think Huachuma has a lot of potential there. And I think actually, honestly, the other overlooked medicine is the first one of them all for me, which is cannabis. I think cannabis has potential as a psychedelic journey that has really been unexplored. And it has a lot of advantages in being mostly basically practically legal in many parts of our country, and also having only basically a 2 hour period of effect, which makes it kind of mythic in its capacity to connect with, the daily schedule of a therapist. But is also, I mean, the addendum to that is like, that's a tricky one. Cannabis is a tricky one. But it'd be good if people tried it out.
When you say tricky, what do you mean by tricky? Because as you were sharing that with me, I was really struggling to listen because I really wanted to say, but,
Yeah,
I would like to know what tricky means for you.
tricky means, I mean, just medically, a definite capacity for addiction as compared to classic psychedelics, which are almost free of that. But which ketamine definitely also has a capacity for addiction. Nobody talking about that so much, but it's true. But cannabis can. The other thing is that cannabis used no. And this is I'm just speaking from my experience. I am not a doctor or a PhD. If you use it once a week, it has the potential for a very transcendent experience. If you use it more often, especially daily, especially multiple times per day, it puts your spirit and body into stasis, and you might not come out of that stasis for a long time.
This has been what I've seen the most.
Yeah,
And my teachers would also have this opinion that the availability of cannabis has gotten in most places, or many places, has gotten to the point of alcohol. It's that easily accessible. And I also hear a lot of people, especially in the quasi neo spiritual world, talking about having a deep relationship with cannabis. And while I want to appreciate that, I also know, to your point, that I don't know how deep that relationship is when you're doing it every day or multiple times a day. And in some ways, it's become a big numbing substance
exactly.
that
Yeah,
allows people to get through their day. In some ways, it's just it's like an antidepressant. People are using it not to feel some of the discomfort of life. And
absolutely.
I think it can be a beautiful plant when used appropriately, but I just don't find very many people who have the level of consciousness, self-awareness, and discipline who are
Just
really using it in a conscious way.
yep. It starts out like, okay, let's pray once a week with cannabis, and then it's like, twice a week. Oh, you know what? Morning prayers. Oh, you know what? Prayers 4 times a day.
Yeah.
So that's why I call it a trickster.
That
So
is also my experience with Hape. I have really
absolutely,
tried to. I was a smoker for 15 years, and I quit smoking in 2008, and have been
yes,
smoke free ever since, outside of Mapacho. But I'll tell you what, you put some Hape in front of me, and it doesn't take very long for me to develop a new relationship, a new habitual and uncomfortable relationship with nicotine.
absolutely. The other day, just for fun, I looked up what are the most, what are the rates of addictions of different drugs and stuff? Tobacco is at the top. Marijuana is kind of in the middle. Alcohol is between those two. Yeah, but yet I'll say that some people say, and a lot of shamans say, tobacco is at the center of the medicine wheel.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So there's an example of something that, like, if you're in right relationship with it, it's medicine. If you're in wrong relationship with it, it's literally poison.
I have my pipe literally sitting right here next to me, and I have never once had a desire to come upstairs and to grab my pipe and to like go out on the back porch and have a good toke. Like that's not it's never been an inclination that I've had with that frame of the medicine.
What's in your pipe? I'm not clear which is what's in it.
That tobacco negro. So it comes from the jungle in Peru. So I don't have a relationship with cannabis. It's never been a medicine that has attracted me.
So it's so much about sets, the famous setting, sitter, substance. Well, one of the things about set is, like, if it's a sacred substance, you had better be using it sacredly or else.
Yeah.
So where's that container?
Yep. Well, let's move into the speed round here. I've got a couple of questions to wrap up our conversation. First, why do you do the work you do?
There is literally nothing better to do. It's the best thing I could be doing.
And I heard before, really, you said healing and awakening. So what is better than those two things?
Healing, awakening for self and other.
Yeah. What is the most important thing this work has taught you?
It's okay. It's okay.
What's the best advice you'd give to somebody that's new on their path of facilitation or guiding or sitting?
Really connect with a part of you that cares most and the deepest, and let that be a guide. Caring.
Well, empathy and compassion. Is there anything that we should have asked you today but didn't?
I can't think of it.
Great. We did our job.
Yeah, good job, TV.
If people wanted to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way that they would do that?
I have a website, and David Luce is my name. If you just Google it, you'll find it. And I don't know when this will be broadcast aside, but I have the web domain of Soma Sangha, so that will be a website at some point sooner rather than later.
Well, we will put the website in the show notes, and when you get the Soma Sangha meditations up or the website up, shoot me an email and we will add that to the show notes as well. And we'll get people over there to experience some somatic meditation.
Yeah, I think it's a great combination, and look forward to that. And thank you so much, Davey. It's been delightfully interesting and fun to talk with you today.
I agree. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your year.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Psychedelic IQ podcast. If you resonated with this episode and are ready to go deeper into your personal work and practice, visit psychedelic.iq.com for more in-depth articles, books, training opportunities, and professionally organized psychedelic experiences hosted in both North and South America. And as always, you're perfect and you're right on time, and the path is wiser than the traveler.